When you think of Germany today, you probably picture a powerhouse, right? One of the strongest economies in the world, maybe even the glue holding the European Union together. But its journey to get here? Well, it wasn't stable at all. It was a nation forged in centuries of conflict, division, and reinvention. So that brings up a really fascinating question. How did a place right at the heart of Europe, a land of poets, thinkers, and innovators, take so long to actually become a unified country? That's what we're going to unpack.
Here's the thing, for most of its history, Germany wasn't really a place you could point to on a map. It was more of a cultural idea, a shared language. But politically, it was a complete mess.
And to really get why, we've got to start with Germany's natural state for hundreds of years, a fragmented heart.
Okay, I want you to try and picture this. It's not one country. It's a patchwork quilt of over 300 different states, kingdoms, duchies, little free cities, all kind of gathered under this big, vague banner of the Holy Roman Empire. Sure, there was an emperor, but the real power, it was all local. True unity was basically impossible.
And then, as if that political division wasn't enough, a religious one came along and threw gasoline on the fire. The Protestant Reformation, kicked off by Martin Luther, didn't just challenge the Pope, it completely shattered the one institution that gave Europe a sense of a common identity.
And that religious split, it led directly to an absolute catastrophe. It all started in 1517 with Martin Luther's 95 Theses. A century later, it exploded into the 30 Years' War. This conflict was so brutal, it killed up to 40% of the population in some German areas. And when it was all over, the Peace of Westphalia didn't unify anything. Nope. It just cemented that fragmentation, locking it in place for another 200 years. But, out of all this chaos, a new, ruthless power started to rise, one with a very different idea about how to unify Germany. And that brings us to the forging of an empire. The architect of this new path was the Prussian statesman Otto von Bismarck. And his philosophy was brutally simple. He believed Germany wasn't going to be united by a bunch of speeches or democratic votes. No, it would be forged by blood and iron, by the raw power of the Prussian military. So Bismarck put this brutally effective three-step plan into motion. Step 1, start a war with Denmark to get all the German states fired up. Step 2, go to war with Austria to kick their main rival out of the picture. And then, the master stroke, provoke a war with France in 1870 to unite every single German state against one common enemy. His whole plan came together on January 18, 1871. And in a final, incredible power move, the German Empire was proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the actual palace of their defeated French rivals. After centuries of being divided, a unified Germany was finally born. But here's the tragic irony. The same militarism that created this empire also planted the seeds of its own destruction, leading to a catastrophic fall and a whole new era of division. You see, the new empire's aggressive ambition, its crazy arms race with Britain, and its tangled web of alliances, it all eventually dragged Europe into the absolute disaster of World War I. And after 4 years of horrific warfare, Germany was defeated, and the empire Bismarck had built completely collapsed.
What came next was pure chaos. The new government, the Weimar Republic, was crushed by war reparations. To pay them, they just printed more and more money, which caused one of the worst cases of hyperinflation in history. People's entire life savings became worthless overnight. It got so bad that money was literally cheaper than wallpaper. And that's the real tragedy of the Weimar Republic. On the one hand, it promised to be this modern, vibrant democracy, and for a little while, Berlin was a world center for arts and science. But the reality for most people was crippling debt, constant political chaos, and just this profound sense of economic despair. This widespread desperation created the perfect storm for extremism. When people feel that hopeless, they start looking for easy answers. And that's exactly where Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party stepped in, promising to restore German pride, rebuild the economy, and of course, find scapegoats to blame for all the problems. Hitler's rise led directly to massive rearmament, then to aggression, and finally to the absolute horror of World War II and the Holocaust. The war ended with Germany in total ruins, completely defeated, and physically split right down the middle by the victorious Allies. But from that total collapse and division, Germany's story takes one more astonishing turn. And that brings us to our final section, a nation reunified. For over 40 years, you had two Germanys. In the West, a country integrated with the US and Western Europe that experienced a stunning economic miracle.
And in the east, a communist state controlled by the Soviet Union, where the secret police, the Stasi, created this climate of constant fear and surveillance. But by 1989, the whole communist bloc was starting to crumble. That summer, Hungary opened its border, giving East Germans an escape route. By October, massive peaceful protests in cities like Leipzig were growing to hundreds of thousands of people. The pressure on the East German regime was becoming just unbearable.
And then, the wall came down almost by accident. Seriously. At a press conference, this tired, ill-prepared East German official named Günter Schabowski was asked when some new relaxed travel laws would take effect. He was totally confused, glanced at his notes, and just kind of mumbled, "As far as I know, effective immediately, without delay."
And that was it. November 9th, 1989, those words were broadcast on TV, and people just could not believe what they were hearing.
Huge crowds just surged to the checkpoints all along the Berlin Wall. The guards were totally overwhelmed, they had no clear orders, so they just opened the gates. The result was one of the most joyous, incredible scenes of the entire 20th century, as a wall that symbolized division was torn down by the very people it was built to imprison. So, a nation forged in the fire of religious wars, unified by blood and iron, destroyed by 2 world wars, and divided by the Cold War, was finally whole again. Reunified, and once more at the very heart of Europe, the one question that remains is, what will Germany's next chapter look like?